Augusta, Georgia, September 24, 1988. The Imperial Theatre was still buzzing with energy, even though the last note had faded 20 minutes ago. Backstage, the air was thick with hairspray, cologne, and the lingering electricity of a performance that had brought 3,000 people to their feet. Marcus Thompson adjusted his tie for the third time, gripping his microphone like a lifeline. At 26 years old, this was his first major interview for Channel 7 News, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "You'll do fine, kid," said Dorothy Hayes, the veteran producer standing beside him. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes held the wisdom of 30 years in broadcast journalism. She'd seen 100 nervous reporters come and go, but something about Marcus reminded her of herself at that age, hungry, determined, and terrified of failure. "Just remember, James Brown isn't like other artists. He's been through more than most people can imagine. He's real, be real back." Marcus nodded, watching as crew members rushed past carrying equipment and coiled cables. The hallway leading to the dressing rooms was narrow, lined with faded posters of past performances. He could hear laughter coming from somewhere deeper in the building, punctuated by the occasional shout of celebration. His producer had briefed him on the situation. Brown was facing serious legal troubles, and every major network wanted a statement. But Marcus had pitched a different angle, not confrontation but conversation. His station manager had given him one shot. "Don't waste it," she'd said. "5 minutes, people," called out Charlie Sullivan, Brown's longtime business manager, as he emerged from the main dressing room. Charlie was a tall man in his 50s, with graying temples and a perpetually worried expression that came from decades of managing one of music's most unpredictable geniuses. He'd been with James since the early 70s, through triumphs and controversies, hits and misses. Tonight he was especially nervous. The legal situation was complicated, and one wrong word to the press could make everything worse. "Keep it tight, keep it respectful," he said, pointing at Marcus. "Mr. Brown has given you 15 minutes. That's more than anyone else got tonight." Dorothy placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder as they followed Charlie down the hallway. The walls were covered with photographs. James Brown with presidents, with other musicians, with fans from around the world. Each image told a story of a man who had risen from crushing circumstances to become an icon. Marcus had done his research. Born in poverty in South Carolina, Brown had transformed himself through sheer will and extraordinary talent. He'd changed music forever, influenced generations, and now, at 55 years old, he was facing questions about his future. The dressing room door opened, and Marcus felt his breath catch. James Brown sat in front of a large mirror surrounded by light bulbs, still wearing his performance shirt, now unbuttoned at the collar. His famous pompadour was slightly disheveled, and there was a towel around his neck. Despite the obvious exhaustion, his eyes were sharp and alert. When he saw Marcus and Dorothy enter with the camera crew, he broke into a wide smile that transformed his entire face. "Come on in, come on in!" Brown's voice was hoarse from 2 hours of singing, but it still carried that unmistakable energy. He stood up, extending his hand to Marcus with genuine warmth. "You're the young man who wanted to talk? Charlie told me about you. Said you wanted to do something different. I like different. Different is good." Marcus shook his hand, feeling the calluses and strength in Brown's grip. "Mr. Brown, thank you so much for this opportunity. I promise to respect your time and your truth." "Truth," Brown repeated, nodding slowly. "That's a good word. That's a real good word." He gestured to a chair positioned across from his own. "Let's talk some truth, then. Dorothy, good to see you again, sweetheart. You still making these young folks look good on camera?" Dorothy laughed, her nervousness evaporating in the presence of Brown's charisma. "Trying my best, James. You look pretty good yourself after that show. I don't know how you do it night after night." "It's the only thing I know how to do," Brown said simply, sitting back down. "When I'm out there, nothing else matters. Not the problems, not the newspapers, not the lawyers. Just the music and the people. They came to feel something tonight, and I made sure they felt it." The camera operator gave a thumbs up, and Dorothy stepped behind the monitor. Marcus settled into his chair, his notes resting on his lap, though he already knew he wouldn't need them. He'd prepared questions, sure, but something told him this conversation would go wherever it needed to go. That was the magic of live television, or in this case, live to tape. You never knew what would happen. "We're rolling in 3, 2, 1. Dorothy counted down silently with her fingers, and suddenly the red light was on. "Mr. Brown," Marcus began, his voice steadier than he expected. "You just gave an incredible performance out there. The crowd was absolutely electrified. How does it feel to still have that effect on people after all these years?" Brown leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Marcus with an intensity that the camera captured perfectly. "Young man, I'll tell you something. When you do what you do with your whole heart, age doesn't matter. Experience doesn't make you old. It makes you better. I've been doing this since I was a boy, shining shoes in front of a radio station, singing for tips. Every performance is like the first one and the last one at the same time. You give everything because you don't know if you'll get another chance." "That's a powerful way to look at it," Marcus said, genuinely moved. "But I have to ask about something that's been in the news recently. There are legal issues you're facing, questions about incidents that have been reported. How do you handle that kind of pressure while still going out there and performing at this level?" Brown's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a mix of frustration and resignation that came from being asked the same question in different ways for months. Charlie Sullivan tensed in the corner, ready to intervene if necessary, but Brown raised a hand slightly, signaling that he was fine. "Pressure?" Brown said, and then something unexpected happened. He started to laugh, not a nervous laugh or a defensive laugh, but a genuine deep laugh that came from somewhere profound. It filled the room, infectious and honest, and even Marcus found himself smiling despite the serious nature of the question. "Let me tell you about pressure, young man." Brown stood up, pacing slightly as he spoke, his hands gesturing to emphasize his points. The camera followed him smoothly, Dorothy adjusting the frame to keep him centered. "Pressure is being 5 years old and not knowing where your next meal is coming from. Pressure is being told you'll never amount to anything because of where you were born or what you look like. Pressure is fighting every single day to be heard, to be respected, to be treated like a human being in a world that doesn't always want to see you that way." He turned back to Marcus, and his smile was still there, but now it carried weight, history, and an unshakable confidence. "These legal situations, they're challenges, sure, they're difficult, and I'm dealing with them. But afraid? Afraid of what might happen." He laughed again, shaking his head. "Son, I've been facing might happen my whole life. I've been knocked down more times than I can count, and every single time I got back up. Because that's what you do. You don't run from your problems. You face them head on, and you keep moving forward." Marcus felt goosebumps rise on his arms. This was the moment, the authentic, unscripted moment that made television powerful. "So you're not afraid?" he pressed gently. "Even with everything that's happening?" Brown sat back down, leaning close to the camera now, speaking directly to every person who would eventually watch this interview. "Let me make this real clear. Fear is natural. Everybody feels fear sometimes, but you can't let it control you. You can't let it stop you from living your life, from doing your work, from being who you are. Whatever happens, happens. I've lived my life with integrity, with passion, with purpose. That's all any person can do." The room was silent, except for the quiet hum of the camera equipment. Even the crew members had stopped moving, captivated by Brown's words. Marcus realized that he was witnessing something special, not just an interview, but a moment of genuine human connection, broadcast for the world to see. "Mr. Brown," Marcus said softly, "that laugh when I asked if you were afraid, that's going to stay with people, that's going to mean something." Brown smiled again, this time with a touch of mischief. "Good. Let it mean something. Let people see that you can face hard times and still smile. Let them see that your circumstances don't define your spirit. That's the real message, young man. That's what I want people to remember." Dorothy made a subtle gesture, indicating they were approaching the end of their allotted time. Charlie Sullivan relaxed visibly, relieved that the interview had gone well. Marcus had one more question, and he wanted to make it count. "Last thing," Marcus said, "what do you want to say to the people who are watching this right now, maybe people who are going through their own difficult times?" Brown took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm, like a teacher imparting the most important lesson. "I'd say this. Your life is yours. Nobody can live it for you, and nobody can take away what you've built inside yourself. Character, dignity, resilience. Those things are yours forever. Whatever storm you're in right now, it's temporary. The sun always comes back, always. You just have to hold on long enough to see it." The interview had wrapped 40 minutes ago, but Marcus Thompson was still sitting in the hotel lobby, replaying every moment in his mind. His notebook lay open on the small table in front of him, filled with scribbled observations and quotes he didn't want to forget. The lobby was quiet at this hour, just past midnight, with only the soft jazz music from overhead speakers and the occasional guest passing through on their way to the elevators. He'd called his station manager immediately after leaving the theater, and her response had been enthusiastic. "Get that edited and ready for tomorrow's evening broadcast. This is gold, Marcus. Pure gold." Dorothy Hayes appeared from the hallway, carrying 2 cups of coffee, one of which she placed in front of Marcus. "Decaf," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "You look like you need sleep more than caffeine." Her professional demeanor had softened now that the cameras were off, revealing the maternal warmth that made her such an effective producer. She'd mentored dozens of young journalists over the years, and she recognized the signs of someone processing a life-changing experience. "I can't stop thinking about it," Marcus admitted, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. That laugh, the way he just owned the moment completely. "I've watched hundreds of interviews preparing for this, but nothing could have prepared me for what it feels like to be in the room with someone like that. It was like he was teaching me something without even trying." Dorothy smiled knowingly. "That's the mark of someone who's lived authentically. James Brown doesn't perform for cameras, he just is. What you saw tonight was the same person who walks through life every day. That consistency, that refusal to be anything other than himself, that's rare, especially in this industry where everyone's trying to present a perfect image." She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "You asked him about fear and his response was to laugh. Not because he was dismissing your question, but because he's faced so much in his life that the concept of being paralyzed by fear seems almost absurd to him." Marcus nodded, understanding washing over him. He reframed the entire conversation. "I came in thinking I needed to get him to admit vulnerability, to show some kind of worry about his situation. But instead, he showed something much more powerful: acceptance. Not giving up, but accepting that life includes challenges and deciding to face them with dignity anyway." "Exactly," Dorothy said. "And that's going to resonate with viewers because everyone's dealing with something. Maybe not legal troubles on a national stage, but their own private struggles. When they see a man who's been knocked down repeatedly still standing there with a smile, still performing with everything he has, still believing in himself, that gives people hope. That's the real story here." Across town, in a modest house on the quieter side of Augusta, Charlie Sullivan was having a very different conversation. He sat at his kitchen table with his wife Rebecca, who had waited up despite the late hour. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with yellow wallpaper and family photographs covering every available surface. Rebecca had been married to Charlie for 28 years, and she'd learned to read his moods with precision. Tonight she could see both relief and concern in his tired eyes. "The interview went well?" Rebecca asked, pouring him a glass of water and sitting down beside him. "Better than I could have hoped," Charlie admitted, running his hand through his graying hair. "The reporter was respectful, and James was, well, he was James. Honest, powerful, charismatic. He answered the tough question head-on, didn't shy away from it, but he also didn't let it define the conversation." That laugh. Rebecca, when the kid asked if he was afraid, James just laughed like it was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. But it wasn't mocking, it was genuine. It was like he was saying, "I've seen real fear and this isn't it." Rebecca reached over and squeezed her husband's hand. "You've been carrying so much worry about him. I can see it eating at you. Every phone call from a lawyer, every newspaper article, every time someone asks you about what's going to happen. You care about him like family." "He is family," Charlie said quietly. "I've been with him for almost 20 years now. I've seen him at his highest highs and his lowest lows. The man is complicated, brilliant, frustrating, and inspiring all at once. But one thing that's never changed is his resilience. No matter what happens, he gets back up. He keeps going. And tonight, watching him in that interview, I was reminded why I've stuck with him through everything. Because he represents something bigger than just music or entertainment. He represents the idea that your past doesn't have to determine your future." "Do you think the interview will help with the public perception?" Rebecca asked gently. Charlie considered this carefully. "I don't know if it will change minds that are already made up, but I think it will remind people who've forgotten why James Brown matters, not just as a performer, but as a person who's lived through the kind of hardship most people can't imagine and still found a way to create beauty, to bring joy, to inspire. That has value. That has meaning." Back at the Imperial Theatre, the cleaning crew was finishing up. The seats were empty now. The stage lights were off, and the building had returned to its usual quiet state. But in one corner of the backstage area, a young woman named Lisa Martinez sat on an equipment case, sketching in a well-worn notebook. At 19, she worked part-time helping with venue setup and teardown while attending community college during the day. Tonight's show had been particularly meaningful to her for reasons she was still processing. Lisa's older brother David had been her hero growing up. He'd taught her to love music, to appreciate the history and artistry behind every performance. 2 years ago, David had faced his own difficult situation. He'd made some mistakes, gotten involved with the wrong crowd, and ended up in serious trouble. The family had rallied around him, but the judgment from the community had been harsh. David had worked hard to turn his life around, taking classes, finding honest work, rebuilding relationships one day at a time. Watching James Brown perform tonight, seeing someone who'd faced public scrutiny and personal challenges still commanding the stage with such confidence and joy, had reminded Lisa of her brother's journey. She looked up as one of the senior crew members, an older gentleman named Frank, approached with a broom in hand. "Still here, kid. Your shift ended an hour ago." "I know," Lisa said, closing her notebook. "I just wanted to sit here for a bit. Tonight was special, wasn't it? The energy in the crowd was different." Frank nodded, leaning against his broom. "Every James Brown show is an event. But yeah, tonight had something extra. Maybe because everyone knows what he's going through. Sometimes people perform their best when they've got something to prove, not to others but to themselves. My brother's trying to do that right now," Lisa said suddenly, surprising herself with the confession. "Prove to himself that he's more than his mistakes. It's hard, you know, when people have already decided who you are based on the worst thing you've ever done." Frank studied her with kind eyes that had seen plenty of life. "I've worked in this industry for 40 years, and I've met all kinds of people. The ones who make it, really make it, not just in career terms but in life terms, are the ones who refuse to let their failures define them. They acknowledge what happened, they take responsibility, but they don't stay stuck there. They keep moving forward. Sounds like your brother's doing exactly that." "He is," Lisa said, feeling emotion rise in her throat. "And watching Mr. Brown tonight, hearing him talk in that interview about not being afraid, about facing whatever comes, I don't know, it made me think that maybe David's going to be okay, that we're all going to be okay if we just keep trying." "That's the power of resilience," Frank said gently. "It's contagious. When you see someone else refuse to give up, it gives you permission to keep fighting too. That's why what James Brown does matters beyond just entertainment. He reminds people that they're stronger than they think." The next morning, as the sun rose over Augusta, 3 different scenes were unfolding simultaneously across the city. In the Channel 7 news editing bay, Marcus and Dorothy were reviewing the interview footage for the final time before broadcast. Every time they watched Brown's laugh in response to the fear question, they felt the same impact. It was authentic, powerful, and deeply human. Marcus had added a closing statement to the piece that he'd written at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep. "In a world that often demands we hide our struggles, James Brown reminds us that true strength lies not in pretending everything is perfect, but in facing our challenges with honest courage and unshakable dignity." At his house, Charlie Sullivan was on the phone with Brown's legal team, discussing strategy and next steps. But for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel overwhelmed by anxiety. The interview had shown the world what Charlie had always known, that James Brown was more than headlines and controversies. He was a human being with depth, wisdom, and an indomitable spirit. Whatever legal outcomes lay ahead, that truth would remain. And at her small apartment, Lisa Martinez was having breakfast with her brother David, who had driven in early from his job site to visit. She told him about the show, about the interview she'd witnessed being filmed, about the way James Brown had responded to difficult questions with grace and strength. David listened carefully, and when she finished, he said quietly, "I needed to hear that today. Thank you for sharing it with me." When the interview aired that evening at 6 o'clock, it reached an audience of over 200,000 viewers in the immediate broadcast area, but its impact would spread far beyond those initial numbers. The segment was picked up by other stations, discussed in newspapers, and replayed on morning shows. That laugh, that genuine, fearless laugh, became a cultural touchstone, a moment that people referenced when talking about resilience, authenticity, and the power of facing life's challenges head-on. Marcus Thompson's career took off after that night. He went on to become one of the most respected journalists in the Southeast, known for his ability to create genuine connections with his interview subjects, but he never forgot that first major assignment, that moment when James Brown taught him that the best questions aren't designed to trap or expose, but to reveal truth and humanity. Dorothy Hayes retired 3 years later, proud of the work she'd done and the young journalists she'd mentored. On her last day at the station, Marcus presented her with a framed photograph from that night at the Imperial Theatre, James Brown, mid-laugh, captured in perfect clarity. On the back, Marcus had written, "Thank you for teaching me that great television starts with seeing people as they truly are. This moment changed my life." Charlie Sullivan continued working with Brown through all the ups and downs that followed. Their relationship deepened over the years, built on mutual respect and genuine care. When people asked Charlie why he stayed loyal through difficult times, he always referenced that interview. "Because I saw what you saw that night, a man who refused to be defeated by circumstances. That's worth standing beside." And Lisa Martinez, she kept that sketch she'd made on the night of the show tucked into her notebook as a reminder. She eventually earned her degree and became a music teacher, introducing new generations of students to the history and power of soul music. She often told them the story of the night she saw James Brown perform and witnessed an interview that taught her more about resilience than any textbook ever could. Years later, when students or colleagues asked James Brown about that famous interview, the one where he laughed at the question about fear, he would smile and say, "That young reporter asked me an honest question, and I gave him an honest answer. Fear is real, but it doesn't have to win. I learned that lesson a long time ago, and I've been teaching it ever since. Not with words necessarily, but with how I live. Every performance, every challenge, every moment is a chance to show that the human spirit is stronger than any circumstance." The interview became part of American cultural history, studied in journalism schools as an example of authentic conversation, referenced in documentaries about resilience, and shared on social media decades later when people needed reminding that difficult times don't last forever, but strong people do. That moment, a simple question, an unexpected laugh and a profound answer, transcended its original context to become something universal. In the end, what Marcus captured that night wasn't just an interview with a famous performer. It was a masterclass in dignity, a testament to the power of staying true to yourself, and a reminder that how we face our challenges matters more than the challenges themselves. James Brown's laugh echoed beyond that dressing room, beyond that broadcast, beyond that moment in time. It became a symbol of unbreakable spirit, of refusing to let fear dictate your story, of choosing again and again to stand up, brush yourself off, and keep moving forward with your head held high. The lights in the Imperial Theatre eventually went dark that night, but the lesson from that interview continued to shine brightly for everyone who needed to see it. Sometimes the most powerful response to fear isn't a carefully crafted statement or a defensive argument. Sometimes it's simply a laugh, genuine, honest, and free, that says, "I've been through worse, and I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere." That was the moment that became a national treasure, not because it was perfect or scripted, but because it was real. And in a world that often feels overwhelming, reality delivered with courage and authenticity is exactly what people need to see.